Now back to the historic verdict in a civil lawsuit against former President Donald Trump. A federal jury in New York decided that Trump is liable for sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll about 30 years ago. Now, she had accused him of raping her and said that he defamed her when he called her account a hoax. The jury did not find Trump liable for rape, but ordered him to pay Carroll $5 million in damages. Trump has denied the claims and plans to appeal the ruling. Here's Elaine Quijano.
After Tuesday's verdict, Carroll issued a statement saying, "I filed this lawsuit against Donald Trump to clear my name and to get my life back. Today, the world finally knows the truth. This victory is not just for me, but for every woman who has suffered because she was not believed."
So, Elaine, when I heard about the conclusion of this case, I thought to myself, oh, she's accusing him of rape, but the jury didn't find him guilty of rape. But they had another option. Can you explain, what the jury had to consider?
Right. So, first of all, it is a civil trial. So I just want to remind folks, it is confusing, right? Because in this kind of proceeding, it is not a finding of guilt. It is a finding of liability, right? Guilt is what you hear in the criminal trial, which is a lot in a criminal trial, I should say, which is what a lot of people are familiar with, right? This was not that. The range of the outcomes here, never jail time because this is a civil case. With that being said, yes, it was a civil rape trial, as you point out correctly, that this was the central accusation made by E. Jean Carroll against the former president. However, I learned this in sitting there listening to the jury instructions yesterday, Anne-Marie, which took about an hour and a half listening to the federal judge, in this case, Judge Kaplan, going through in minute, and I should say at times explicit detail, the elements that constitute battery under New York state law. And so I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially, rape was one of the options. Sexual abuse was another, and that has to do with, the touching, the groping. And that is also, if you'll recall, what Roberta Kaplan, E. Jean Carroll's attorney, tried to establish as sort of the MO, the modus operandi, she said, of Donald Trump, and she pointed to that Access Hollywood tape. They also called to the stand two women who alleged that Donald Trump had, in fact, had these encounters with them as well, separate incidents as well. So the jury heard all of that, right? And that was a case where it wasn't just one instance. They were hearing these multiple sort of accounts separately from what E. Jean Carroll had alleged. And so while we don't have concrete insight into what the jury was thinking, that could have been what led them to their eventual decision.
Now, his attorneys really didn't sort of launch a defense. And their argument was basically like, hey, how can we argue against something that never even happened?
Well, that's exactly right. And, it's interesting you should say that because Donald Trump himself, we want to underscore, had the right over the course of this trial to appear, to testify in court under oath and answer to these accusations. And in fact, at one point last week, you recall the former president was overseas visiting his golf clubs in Ireland and Scotland and said on camera, and two reporters seemingly suggested that he would cut his trip short to come back and essentially testify under oath during this trial. Well, the judge said, okay, well, we'll extend that deadline for you to notify the court, which had already been extended multiple times, but we'll extend it another time here till Sunday night. Sunday night came and went, and the former president declined. So I know there's some confusion out there, and the former president has made some false claims about not being allowed to, defend himself. But he was given ample opportunity to appear.
And they did hear from him in those deposition tapes. I don't know if it helped or harmed him.
Yeah, but we'll see what the jury says. If, in fact, any of them decide to come forward, it's highly doubtful, because that's another thing that's so fascinating about this case. Those jurors were anonymous, and you don't see that very often.
No, you
but
don't.
It sort of speaks to the high-profile nature of this case.
Oh, it's so interesting. Elaine Quijano, thank you.
Sure.
So ahead on CBS Mornings, E. Jean Carroll shares her reaction to the jury's decisions. You can stream that interview right here in our 8 a.m. Eastern hour.